Hey guys, Mr. Roden here. Just want to go through this reteach video with you guys and let you know what to do. So if you want to retake your tests, you can do that. So let's take a look. So for quiz 6.1 through 6.3b, this is the reteach video. And all you have to do is watch this video and you need to find the problems that you missed. Okay, so go through before watching this video, I'd pause me right now and I'd go through and find each problem you missed, okay? The ones that are red on your Schoology test. Then you're gonna write down the work for each problem you missed. It may not be in the same order I go into because when we set these tests up, we scramble the order. So my order might not be your order. So you might have to rewind and fast forward and find the problem that you missed that I'm doing. You need to show all of your work from this video to your math teacher, and then you need to schedule a time to retake your quiz with your math teacher. Okay, so that's how we're going to do this quiz. So let's get started. Let me go through each one of the problems and see how you do each problem. And then after that, you need to make sure you're writing this down. Okay, so here's the first problem that I did right here. It's number one. It's my number one. I don't know what number it's for you, so you go ahead and find this problem. The question says a triangle with 4, 8, and 12 forms a right triangle. Is this true or false? Well, we know that the Pythagorean theorem says a squared plus b squared equals c squared for all right triangles. So if it's true, then a squared plus b squared on the left side, this is your left side right here, will be the same as c squared on your right side. So let's go ahead and look at the numbers and make sure you're writing this down if you missed this problem. Well, I'm going to make a 4, so this will be my a. I'll make b 8, and then c is always the longest side, so we'll make c 12. So 4 squared is 16, 8 squared is 64, and when you add 16 plus 64, you get 80. Now c squared is 12. 12 squared is 144, so 80 does not equal 144. So a squared plus b squared does not equal c squared, so it is not a right triangle. So that would be, in this case, it would be false, okay? So write down your work if you missed this problem. Remember, no work, no retake. All right, so the next one says find the cube root of 216. Well, what is a cube root? Well, think about what a cube is. A cube is a number multiplied by itself 3 times to equal the volume or an answer. So if you look at 6 to the third power, 6 to the third power is 6 times 6 times 6, which is 216. So if we reverse that, the cube root of 216 is 6, because 6 is the number that was multiplied 3 times by itself to get 216. So the answer is 6, because 6 times 6 times 6 is 216. So the cube root of 216 is 6. All right. Now this one I had a lot of questions on this when you guys were taking this. My students were taking this. It says find the 2 square roots. Now, normally we just want the positive square root, but sometimes the negative square root also works. So let's take a look. So 256. I noticed that 16 times 16 is 256, and you should be looking at your perfect square sheet. I'm not expecting you to memorize this. So that tells us that the square root of 256 is 16, okay? So that's one of the answers, 16. Now, there's also another answer. Negative 16 times negative 16 is 256. Normally, we only want the positive one, okay? But sometimes we want the negative one. So we also know that the square root of 256 is negative 16. Okay, normally we only want the positive one, but sometimes we want to show you guys that there is always a negative one that also works. Okay, so in this case, since it asks for 2, we give them positive 16 because the square root of 256 is positive 16. And then we say the square root of 256 is negative 16. So those are the 2 different answers you could have there, plus and minus 16. All right, the next one, number 4. Find the length of the hypotenuse. Well, the hypotenuse is And again, this is my number 4. This may not be your number 4. So you're going to have to pause me, stop me, rewind me, and just until you find these problems. Okay? All right. So a squared plus b squared equals c squared on a right triangle, the Pythagorean theorem. So in this case, x is going to be our c because it's the longest side and it's opposite the right angle. So a and b can either be 6 or 8. So I said a squared, so I said 6 squared plus 8 squared equals x squared. Well, what is 6 squared? 6 squared is 36. 6 times 6 is 36. What is 8 squared? 8 squared is 64. 36 plus 64 is 100. So we get 100 equals x squared. Now, that's not our answer, is it? Because what do we have to do? Well, we have, in order to figure out, we have x squared. We don't want x squared. We want x equals. See here, we want x equals. It doesn't say x squared equals. We want x equals. So how do we go from something squared to something not squared? We square root both sides. Well, the square root of 100 is 10, and the square root of x squared is x. So in this case, we get x equals 10. So that's what you would want to put in that problem. Okay, so make sure you're writing that down if you missed it. All right, next problem. I'll go ahead and find this one for me, will you? All right, so this one is a squared plus b squared equals c squared. Again, this is the Pythagorean theorem. So it's saying a, they want us to find a, so I just made the missing side a because we're trying to find the missing side, and this problem said, hey, we're going to make it a. So a squared plus b squared equals c squared. Well, a is a, right, because I don't know what it is, but b is going to be 12. It's the non-hypotenuse side. And then c has to be 15. Remember, guys, the right angle always points to c. This has to be c. Okay, that longest side has to be c, so that's 15 squared. So I do the math here. A squared, don't know what that is, but I know 12 squared, that's 144, and I know 15 squared is 225. Now, in this case, I'm not trying to find a hypotenuse, I'm trying to figure out what a is, so I have to subtract here to get a squared by itself. So I take 144 on the left side, I subtract 144 on the right side, and I get a squared equals 225 minus 144 is 81. Okay? Now, remember, I get a squared equals 81. I don't want to know what a squared is. I want to know what a is. So how do you go from an a squared to just a? Well, yeah, you square root both sides. The square root of a squared is a. The square root of 81 is not 81. The square root of 81 is, let me write that neater. The square root of 81 is 9, right? So I almost made a mistake there as myself. The square root of 81 is 9, okay? Because 9 times 9 is 81. All right, next problem here is that we want to put the irrational or rational. All right, so let's just go through, and I just kind of wrote some things down here. So 0.46 is rational. A rational number is any number that can be written as a fraction. All right, now why is 0.46 rational? It doesn't look like a fraction. Well, because all decimals that end are rational. And why is that the case? Because 0.46, that's 46 over 100. And 46 over 100 is a fraction. If you can write it as a fraction, it's rational. So 46 over 100, 0.46 is 46 over 100, which is a fraction, which is a rational number. Okay? Okay, negative 220 square root of 225. Well, what I do is I just keep that negative out in front. And well, let's see here. So it's negative square root of 225. Well, the negative comes, what's the square root of 225? That's 15, right? And then the negative is just along for the ride. So negative 15. Is negative 15 rational? Well, yeah, I can just write negative 15 as negative 15 over 1. It's rational. If I can write it as a fraction, it's rational. Okay, the square root of 35. Is that rational? No, that is irrational. Okay, the reason why it's irrational is irrational numbers are non-perfect square roots. Okay, so that's one way you can get an irrational number, if it's a non-perfect square root. In this case, it's not perfect. There is no number, and if you look at your square root chart, there's 25, there's 49, but there's 36, right? But there's no square root of 35, so that would be irrational. And the reason there is it's not a perfect square root, not perfect square root. Okay. And the last one is rational. And the best way I can say it's rational is it's a fraction. Yes, it's a negative fraction, but that's okay. all fractions are rational. If you can write something as a fraction, it's rational. So negative 13 over 20 is definitely a fraction, so it is rational. So the only one that was irrational was the square root of 35 because it wasn't a perfect square. Everything else was rational. All right, what's next? Okay, so this we want what is the length of the hypotenuse? Again, now this one a lot of kids struggled with because it was hard for them, right? They were like, Mr. Roden, what do I do? They have all the numbers. I'm used to I'm finding a missing number. Well, they gave you it. So all you have to do on this problem is just identify which number represents the hypotenuse. Well, remember the right angle always points to the hypotenuse, or the hypotenuse is always the longest side. So it's 20. So that would just be 20. That was like so easy. A lot of kids, it was so easy. It was, some kids were struggling with that because it was so easy. So the reason it's 20 is the hypotenuse because it's the longest side. Okay? All right, next one. So we want to estimate to the nearest tenth. Now, what is the nearest tenths? So think about this. We have the ones place. Then we have the decimal. Then we have the tenths place. And then we have the hundredths place. Okay, so we want to round to the tenths place. So a number rounded to the tenths place. So if we had something like 7.81, if we round that to the tenths place, that would just be 7.8. Okay, so we just basically want a decimal that is close to the tenths place to the square root of 150. Well, where does the square root of 150 lie? It lies somewhere between the square root of 144, which is 12, and 169, which is 13. Now, which one is it closer to? Well, it's closer to this 144, right? Because this guy right here, it's only 6 away here. This one, what is that? That's 19 away. So it's much further away from the 13 than it is the 12. In fact, it's pretty darn close. So I said about 12.2. And I think you could get within a decimal point of that, and Schoology would still give it to you. So I would say about 12.2 would be our answer. It's slightly bigger than 12 because this 150 is slightly bigger than 144. So the square root of 150 is slightly bigger than the square root of 144, which is 12. So it's a little bit bigger than 12. So about 12.2. There were other decimal answers that you still could have gotten credit for. Okay? All right. This next one says, the area of a square is 361 meters squared. The side length of the square is what? Well, it's saying here, I have this square, and I tell you that the area is 361 meters squared. How long is the side? Well, how do I go from area to side length? I take the square root. So all I have to do is take the square root of 361, and that should be in your notebook. Okay, we have these in our notebooks, guys. So you don't have to memorize that. So the square root of 361, that should be in your notebook, and that's 19. Now, here's the deal. We're talking about a side. So remember, area is squared, side length is not squared. It's just what we call linear measurements. So here, and this is a little tricky, right? So we have two different answers. Which one is it going to be? Is it going to be the 19 meters, or is it going to be the 19 meters squared? Well, remember, we're trying to figure out the side length, not the area. So it's not the area. Area is squared. Side length is not squared. So it's going to be 19, just plain old 19. Okay, so some of you may have missed it just because you got 19, but you forgot that side length is not squared. Area is squared. We're not asking for the area. They tell us the area. What we're trying to find is the side length. Side length is not squared. Okay? All right. This next one is find the length of the cube if its volume is 512. Okay, well, what is a cube? A volume is length times width times height, or side times side times side. So what we're trying to figure out is what number times itself 3 times is 512. Well, you go look at your list and you notice that the cube root of 512 is 8, because 8 times 8 times 8 is 512. So all you would have to put here is 8, because the cube root of 512 is 8. Okay? All right. Next problem. Okay, this one's kind of an interesting problem. It says find the area of if the area of the square is 81, find its perimeter. Okay, so think about what we're trying to find here. We're trying to figure out the perimeter. Now, how do you find the perimeter of a square or anything really? You just add up all the sides. So what we're going to do is we're going to find the side length and we're going to add it 4 times to itself, because perimeter is equal to side plus side plus side plus side. You could also say, if you're into shortcuts, it's equal to 4 times the side. So either way is fine. I'm just going to say, okay, I know it, I'm going to add the side 4 times. And since it's a square, I know all the sides are going to be the same length. So I don't know how long the sides are, but I do know what the area is. And how do I go from area to side length? Well, yeah, I take the square root. That's what square roots do. They go from area to one of the sides. Well, what's the square root of 81? It's 9. So what I've figured out here, class, is I figured out that all these sides are 9. Because once I know one of the sides, the square root of 81 is equal to 9. So all the sides are 9. And how do I find the perimeter? I just add them up. 9 plus 9 plus 9 plus 9. What's 9 plus 9 plus 9 plus 9? Or 9 times 4? It's 36. So that's the answer I'd want there, 36 feet. Okay? Awesome. All right, this next problem is a little more challenging. Mr. Rigo used to teach math here. That's why his name's in here. Thinks the area is 225 of this TV. Mr. Joyner thinks the area of the TV is 120. Who is correct? Well, how do you find area? Area is always length times width, okay? Length times width always gives you your area. Now, here's the problem. I know the length is 15, right? I don't know what the width is. The width is x. So before I can figure out the area of this rectangle or TV, I have to figure out the width. Okay, so in order to find the width, I see a right triangle here. I have to use the Pythagorean theorem. What does the Pythagorean theorem say? It says a squared plus b squared equals c squared. Y'all see that? All right, well, let's plug the numbers in. Well, we don't know what a is, so I'm going to call that x. So x squared plus 15 squared equals 17 squared. Well, x squared don't know it, so I'm just going to copy it down from here to here. 15 squared is 225, and 17 squared is 289. Now, what I'm trying to find here, class, is I'm trying to figure out what x squared is. So I subtract 225 from both sides, and I get x squared equals, well, 289 minus 225 is 64. Now, I don't want x squared, I want x. So I take the square root of both sides. And so the square root of 64 is 8. Now, I'm almost done. You can kind of see so the area is length times width. So the area is 8 because I figured out my length or my width is 8 times 15, which is 120. And that's what Mr. Joyner said. Maybe that's why he's the principal, because he's smart and gets the right answers on stuff. So Mr. Joyner was correct that it was 8 times 15, which was the area. Now, what did Mr. Rigo do wrong? He multiplied 15 times 17. Well, no, there's no formula that says length times diagonal gives you area. It's length times width, right? So the 17 is not part of the area formula. We just had to use that to find the width, okay? It was the diagonal. All right, so we want to put these in order from least to greatest. So what I did is I just made a little cheat sheet here. Okay, the square root of 46 is about 6.8. And how did I know that? Well, let's see here, square root of 36 is 6. Square root of 49 is 7. It's somewhere between 6 and 7, and it's a little closer to the 7. So I said about 6.8. I mean, it doesn't have to be exact, but that helps me just kind of put them in order. Now, 7 is 7, right? The negative square root of 47, you know what? It's just some negative number. And I didn't really even figure out what negative square root of 47 is about equal to, because I see the negative on there. So I just call it some negative number, right? And then this means absolute value. These little lines right here. Absolute value always takes away the negative. So the absolute value of negative 7.1 is just 7.1. So now I want to put them in order from least to greatest. Least on top, and then I go into the bottom as the biggest. Okay, so let's see here. Well, what's the least number? The negative number is the least. Negative numbers are always less than positive numbers. So all the other numbers are positive except for the negative sign. So except for negative 40 square root of 47. So that has to be the smallest, because negatives are always smaller than positives. And then what's the next after that? Okay, well, 6.8 would be the next one because the other ones are in the sevens, right? So the square root, so that would be what this is going to be. Sorry, we'll say this is the square root of 46, right? So that would be the next one because that's about 6.8. And the next one after that would be just plain old 7. And then the next one after that would be the absolute value of negative 7.1 because whenever you take an absolute value, it becomes positive. So the absolute value of negative 7.1 would be the largest number because that is just equal to 7.1. And we're done. All right, so here we go. So are these mathematically possible in the real set of numbers? Okay, well, let's see here. The first one is yes, okay, because look what I can do, because they want to know the cube root of negative 27. So yes, because negative 3 times negative 3 times negative 3 is negative 27. A negative times a negative is a positive, but then you multiply it again by a negative and you get negative. So this is absolutely possible. The cube root of negative 27 is negative 3. The square root of, now remember, this is a square root because there's no 3 out in front. The square root of negative 81. Well, that's no. Well, the reason why is negative 9 times negative 9 is 81, right? 9 times 9 is 81. So there's no way to get that negative. And that negative inside there is what makes it impossible. You cannot multiply a number times itself and get a negative answer. So that would be no. So this one would be no. What about this negative square root of 144? Well, sure, the negative's out in front, so it's just going to tack onto my final answer. Well, the square root of 144 is 12, and then the negative's just hanging out in front. There's nothing, because since he's out of the square root box, he doesn't get affected by the square root. So he's just hanging out there, and then he tacks onto my final answer. So the square root of 144 is 12, and then the negative just tacks onto the final answer because it's on the outside. Okay, what about the negative cube root of 64? Well, yeah, same thing. What's the cube root of 64? 4. And then the negative just gets tacked on because it's on the outside. So if the negative is on the outside, then it's always true. If the negative is on the inside, it's true if it's a cube root, and it's not true if it's a square root. Okay? Does that make sense? So the only one here that was not true is when we had a square root with a negative underneath the square root sign. Okay, that's when you have the non-real numbers. All right, so let's see here, this one. Okay, so we just break this fraction up into, I call this big mama square root right here. This is big mama square root, and I broke it up into 2 little baby square roots. And so the square root of 16 is 4, and the square root of 121 is 11. Made a little mistake there. So in there, you would want to say 4 over 11. Sound good? And you can just use the little slash key with the question mark sign. I think that works. All right, moving on. Here we go. All right. Put these numbers in order from least to greatest. Well, let's see here. I just went through and made a little cheat sheet. So the square root of 24 is about 4.8 because it's really close to the square root of 25, which is 5. 4.5 is 4.5. The cubed root of 125, well, 5 times 5 times 5 is 125. So I know that's 5, and then 5.1 is 5.1. So now we just go through and find the smallest number. Well, the smallest number in my little cheat sheet here is 4.5. So we'll put that on top. The next one after that is 4.8, which is the square root of 24. The next one after that is 5, which is the cubed root of... One second, I'm gonna second here. Sorry about that, guys. Had to answer a quick phone call for that awkward moment. So anyways, so what do we got here? We got 4.5, square root of 24, which is very, very, very close to 5, but not quite. The cube root of 125, which is actually 5, and then 5.1, which is slightly bigger than 5. Okay? All right, next one. Okay, so here's where a lot of you miss this. The nearest integer. Okay, so what is an integer? An integer is a positive and negative whole number. So if you look at, I'll make a quick integer line. Okay, the integers are 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, ... and negative 1, negative 2, negative 3, negative 4. So remember, guys, an integer always is a negative or positive whole number. It doesn't have to always be positive. It doesn't always have to be negative. It's just a negative or positive whole number. Okay, so we want to round the square root of 56 to the nearest integer. All right, so let's see here. The square root of 49, the square root of 56 is between the square root of 49 and the square root of 64. The square root of 49 is 7. The square root of 64 is 8, okay? So which one is it closer to? Well, it's 7 away from the square root of 49, and it's 8 away from the square root of 64. So it's slightly closer to the 7 because it's only 7 away, and it's 8 away from the square root of 64. So it's slightly closer to the 7. And 7 is an integer. Remember, an integer. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. These are all integers, so it's closest to the 7, not 7.2 or something like that. It's not asking for you to round it. It's just 7. Okay, no decimal here. Integer means no decimal. That's another way to think about an integer, no decimal. So they don't want a decimal. All right, next one. A triangle with 7, 24, 25. Is that a right triangle? Well, like that other one we did, or if you haven't seen it yet, it's a squared plus b squared equals c squared. Well, in this case, we'll say a is 7, b is 24, and c is 25. So 7 squared is 49, 24 squared is 576, and 25 squared is 625. Now, all of those are in your perfect square list. So there's nothing that you have to really do there in multiplication. Now you do have to you have to add here. What's 49 plus 576? Well, that's 625. And so the answer, and this is 625 here. So the answer is yes, it is, because 625 equals 625. A squared plus b squared equals c squared. So that's true. So that is yes. If a squared plus b squared equals c squared, then it is true. All right. Find the length of the hypotenuse round to the nearest tenths place. So this one we want a decimal on it, okay? All right, so a squared plus b squared equals c squared. So we have 8 squared we'll call a, so 8 squared plus 5 squared equals c squared. And so I have 64 plus 25 equals c squared. Add them up, we have 64 plus 25, we get 89. So we get c squared equals 89. A squared plus b squared equals c squared. Now, and I just flipped it around here. So now how do we get rid of a c squared and just get c? You square root both sides. The square root of c squared is c. Now, what's the square root of 89? Well, it's bigger than 9. It's bigger than 9 because the square root of 81 is equal to 9. So it's slightly bigger than 9, but it's obviously less than 100, so it's between 9 and 10. So it's not quite halfway. So it's about 9.4 after you kind of guesstimate it and things like that. So not quite halfway. It's almost halfway, but not quite. So I guessed about 9.4. And it does, if you guess 9.5 or 9.6 or 9.3, probably it'll give it to you. So anything around there. So my guess is 9.4 would be a good answer for that one. Okay. All right, the last one, here we go. So number 20 says, evaluate this expression. Well, the first thing I want to do is I want to do any fractions. Simplify any fractions. Nope, no fractions. Now the next thing I want to do is I want to take the square root. Take square roots. Okay, well, the square root of 36 is 6. So this is 9 times 6 minus 11. So remember, all I did is just take the square root of 36 and got, in this case, 6. Square root of 36 is 6. After that, what I want to do is I want to do multiplication and division. Multiplication and division. Multiplication and division. Well, I have multiplication here. Well, what's 9 times 6? Well, 9 times 6 is 54. So now I have 54 minus 11. And then the last thing we always want to do is add and subtract. Add and subtract. Well, what's 54 minus 11? Well, 54 minus 10 is 44, right? But then we want to take one way away from that for 43. So our answer is going to be 43 right there. And I'm done. Okay, hope this video helped. Hope you were able to find all the answers that you missed and get the correct answers, and you are ready to retake the test. All right, we will see you later. Hold on, my head is, I don't know what happens here. See you later.